I'm Lawrence Francis, host of Interpreting Wine, welcoming you to the Mosaic of Wine Series 1. Giving my audience of wine lovers, students and professionals from across the world access to some of the most interesting, successful and influential people working in and around the world of wine. Series episodes explore the guest's backstory, covering their foundations, growth and legacy, using Interpreting Wine's Mosaic storytelling model. I would love this episode and this series to be the start of a conversation, so please make sure you're subscribed to Interpreting Wine podcast to be alerted when each series episode goes live. We continue the Mosaic of Wine series today in the company of Bree Stock, Master of Wine. We discuss her formative experiences in the Willamette Valley, before getting into her winemaking and viticultural experiences in Spain, Portugal and Germany, including a fascinating cultural deep dive into her time in Austria. We discuss the founding families of the valley and talk greater diversification in the wine industry, both in the context of local investment in Pinot Noir and the ongoing opportunity within the Willamette Valley, before getting into Bree's winemaking project, Limited Edition Wines, and discussing how diversity serves greater resilience in a rapidly evolving consumer audience. Before a huge special announcement, which is that Interpreting Wine will be delivering a session on wine storytelling at the Oregon Wine Symposium 2025, closing on how you can get involved with Bree's mission to increase diversity in the wine industry. Enjoy.
Going back to early 2014 was my first return to the Willamette Valley. Probably in about a decade. When I used to live in Vancouver, BC in Canada, I'd been down to the valley once or twice, but I was a sommelier in Vancouver, and so was interested. But back in those days, the early 2000s, the Willamette Valley wasn't really on the map yet. But by the time I returned in 2014, it was very much the sideways effect had happened, and there was certainly a lot of interest and growth in cool climate Pinot Noir and that real focus on Pinot Noir. And so I returned in 2014, right in January, actually, right before going to my stage 2 seminar in Napa Valley for the Master of Wine. And I spent 3 days here, and I really, I didn't see everyone, but I spent enough time with sort of producers that I considered to be, maybe they weren't the initial, old guard that really established the industry here, but they were that second wave in the 90s, and I'm talking about, Mike Etzel at Beaufrere and Doug Tennell at Brickhouse, and people who were really embracing biodynamic farming and those types of farming practices and considerations, and also, planting some other grape varieties as well beyond Pinot Noir. And so that was in January, and I just had a really, quite magical experience. I mean, when you're here in the Willamette Valley in the winter, it's very gray and very wet and very foggy. I think you visited
January
or February, so
exactly.
You've experienced the doldrums. But it's also very beautiful, and the fog everywhere, and it's quite it's just quite engaging and magical and special. And so having some really nice conversations and experiencing some really beautiful Pinot Noirs and Gamets, I was sort of curious to return, and I was fortunate enough to be invited that year in 2014 to Pinot Camp, which occurs every June in the Willamette Valley and is put on by the Willamette Valley Wineries Association. But it's a really just a deep dive and a really engaging sort of 3-day event, and very, very thoughtful, and just so much work goes into putting this, Pinot Camp event on that, you get taken to vineyards where they're established vines, they've dug soil pits, you get to stand in a soil pit with, some of the founders and then some of the new makers and viticulturists and people who are really, doing the groundwork here in the Willamette Valley. And it's just such an important, I mean, it's marketing for sure, but it's just such an important educational tool for a region that is really quite small in terms of its production. In the US, it's really only about 1% of all US wine production. But people who come to Pinot Camp are really, I mean, a lot of them end up moving here, such as myself. But a lot, where it really tries to make that connection, that on-ground connection between the specialness of this place, the Willamette Valley, and Oregon at large, and having people take a little piece of that back to where they're selling wine and able to connect with consumers and, retail and really be ambassadors for the Willamette Valley and for this region and for what the people are doing here. So I connected at that event with Mimi Castile and Ben Castile from Bethel Heights Vineyard, which, they were really one of the founding families in the Eola Amity Hills AVA back in 1975, 77. And Mimi and I, we have the similarity of age, and Ben as well. We're all the same age, born at the same time. And I think we have some of the, similar concerns about the world at large and, what our impact on it. And so Mimi is just a very incredibly thoughtful speaker, as is her mother, Pat Dudley, and her father as well, and Ben's father. Very thoughtful viticulturists, very thoughtful business people, and really lovely makers. And so I feel like it was just a very deep and organic connection that I had with Mimi, and I'm sure that she connects with many people that way because she certainly has her fan base around the world. But she was talking about things like the biodiversity of the yeasts and microbiome and mycorrhizal fungi and things in the soils and things that hadn't really been touched on very often in the wine world in 2014. And so she was really bringing a lot of her background in forest ecology into the wine industry and thinking about, soil health, plant health, protecting the biodiversity of this place. Having seen a lot of development since the birth of Sideways and that phenomenon as well. So she's always been at kind of the forefront of that, and we just really connected. And she suggested that I come back and do harvest with her, and so that was my sort of intro into the Willamette Valley. And it just coincided also with me passing my theory and practical exams of the Master of Wine examination and, needing to work on a research paper. And I wanted to do something on the US market and understanding the US market for Australian wines, because Australian wines had been quite damaged, obviously, by, large production and certain stylistic choices and things like that over the past decade. So that coming here and working here gave me that ability to be in this place, connect with distributors and importers in the US, but also be on the ground here, and really dig my roots in here and really explore a little more here.
Quick one for those of you listening who work with producer groups and wine regions. If you're struggling to break through the noise and communicate your unique story, what you might not know is that Interpreting Wine offers best-in-class marketing services to unlock your unique character and tell your story more effectively. In today's competitive wine storytelling landscape, we've developed a transformative 3-phase approach. Tell better stories, increase event engagement, and activate untapped audiences. Transforming how you connect with your target market and driving measurable business results. We've reached full capacity for client projects with no new engagements until 20th of January 2025. Lock in our 2024 prices before they rise in January. Head to interpretingwine.com/2025 prices, where you can read the full blog and join the waitlist before we close. Now, let's get back to the podcast. Yeah, I can absolutely relate to that time of year as well. In all of the things that you said there, Bree. And yeah, thinking back now, I mean, it's now getting on for, what is it now? Getting on for 5 years since I was there, which seems a lot shorter than that. But or 5 years ago. But I felt as well that there was that kind of energy of just maybe in the cycle of the year that the people I spoke with were just very present. I guess already by January time, all of the stresses from harvest and bottling and a lot of the sort of work pressures are probably not there, and so I think it was probably a wise choice from the Willamette Valley Winery Association, who actually invited me over that time to kind of bring me over. But equally, I got caught in fog a couple of times, and it just sort of rolled in, and I was like, oh, this is a moment, and it's a pretty magical place. You just sort of get sucked in a way, and I and especially love there, even in your answer there, I often, you'll hear me talking about people and then talking about culture, but it's almost impossible to do that in Oregon, because I think the people are naturally so tied in, and they're a fabric of the culture, and just the stories that I heard about people helping one another, and even just without any prompting at all, promoting one another, which I can tell you does not happen in most wine regions. People are way more often, they want to kind of just, focus on themselves and their own wines, but with no prompting at all. In Oregon, they were talking about each other and how they learn from each other, and I love their wines, and we drink each other's wines all the time. So that really says a lot, I think.
It has long been that sort of collaborative nature of an industry. And I think probably because it was started, really only 50 years ago, but just by a handful of people. And, they needed to rely on each other to learn from each other and share that information. And, it's really only been the last decade that we've seen bigger players move into the market here. Before that, it's always been, people, families who own 20 acres or 40 acres, planting the vineyards themselves and, tending the vines themselves. It's really only been the last 10 to 20 years that we started to see more vineyard management companies coming in and, more, asset management sort of acquisitions, and then bigger players like, Jackson Family. And of course, we have Constellation here now, and, the St. Michel Group. It's been, we're now starting to be actually an industry, and so, there's certainly some growing pains here, but still at the heart of it, I think everyone still likes to see each other do well. And, if we have, whether it's, my wine sitting on the shelf in New York or South Carolina or my neighbors, it's still, we're proud to have an Oregon wine, out there. And we all have a lot of the similar philosophies and very rooted in the environment here, and protecting the beauty and diversity of this place.
I love it. And let's change tack a little bit here, really, because there are topics that are going to come up later, which I think actually an important part of the story that I'd love to draw out from you is actually around your harvest experience globally, really. So I think that would really be, I think, great to kind of fill in the story, and I guess talk about some of those countries that you've made wine in that maybe you don't get to talk about so much.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Australia, I made wine in and started a lot of, that sort of initial experimentation into the cellars in the Yarra Valley and Mornington Peninsula in Australia with, De Bordeley wines. And, I was a salesperson with them, key accounts manager, but I, was invited. I had such an interest in, what styles, we were consuming and what the interest was of sommeliers. And they were just really encouraging of me to come down and make a wine for myself and experience it and put into, action some of my thoughts around what wine styles were going to take off, and what I wanted to experience. And so that was really special for me. And then, I was in the MW program, in the start of the MW program. And I remember having a conversation with a winemaker who spent a lot of time in London because, London is a big market for Australian wine. And he had some friends that were actually MWs. And one of them was an Australian MW who had relocated to London. And he was sort of saying to me, it's just the tyranny of distance. Being a student in Australia is very real. To try to gain a global wine perspective when we have such a large Australian market ourselves. And then, import taxes on wine that are not friendly to, other wines. So I didn't see in Australia a lot of Chilean wine or South African wine or things like that. And so I kind of took that to heart from him. And, he sort of said, take a look at where you feel like you're really lacking in your education in the wine world, and see if you can, link the two together. And I thought, well, I have great, I'm a sommelier, I'm a importer, distributor. I know the business, the sales business side and the trend side of wine. So I don't really need to spend a lot of time there from like the tasting aspect, but I don't have a lot of experience in the winemaking side and the viticulture side. So how can I link these two together? And, I was fortunate to be working with a Spanish and Portuguese import portfolio that I had a lot of respect for the producers in that portfolio. And it was a really intentional selection of wineries from Spain and Portugal that were sort of remaking the Spanish and Portuguese wine scene, but from a very intentional protection of old vines, protection of biodiversity. Most of them were biodynamic certified producers or organic certified producers. And so I started there. I, went and worked in Portugal, in the Douro, and working, with people who were really starting to reimagine what the Douro Valley could be, understanding that, fortified wines were not the highly popular wines that they once were 100 years ago or 50 years ago. And so, working with like Dirk Newport and exploring some of these really beautiful white varieties and how, Touriga Nacional or Bastardo could be made into a lighter red table wine style, and trying to reimagine these hillside old vine vineyards. And so that was sort of where I started with wine, with the winemaking side. And then, I went to Austria and worked in Middle Burgenland for a small family producer called Weingut Strein. And the matriarch of the family had started that winery. It had been in her family, and now her children were in charge of it, and they were in their 20s. So they had the 19-year-old was at school for viticulture, the 22-year-old was the winemaker, and the the eldest, the daughter, was in the business side. And we sort of started talking about with her, like how, the women in wine part coming out and really trying to find how women can be a little more represented in the wine industry and in the cellar, and not just from, a sales perspective or like answering the emails perspective, kind of, really bringing their fingerprints or thumbprint to the wine industry. And so working in Austria, I learned so many things about running a family business, about, the continuation of heritage, the reimagining of what a region is as well, because that was also the time when, Austria was sort of really propelling into this sort of ambitious style of winemaking that was sort of a remnant from the Parkerization of wine.
Mm-hmm.
And you
Mm-hmm.
were seeing Blaufränkisch and Saint Laurent and Zweigelt be, very ripe styles with capitalization and, lots of, fancy new oak on them, and really trying to push like more of a Bordelais style of winemaking. Um, and I thought it was kind of old fashioned, for them to be just sort of getting into this when the rest of the world in 2013 we were sort of moving away from that style of
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
winemaking, and, that reliance on artifact and, sweetness and not transparency in wine. And so I got to, have those conversations in a small region that maybe hadn't caught up yet to the rest of the world, and then also understanding, you know, the vineyard structure in Austria, around these villages, the plots are all together, you don't have like necessarily an estate vineyard,
Mm-hmm.
like your domain is not on your vineyard. But all of the vines are sort of together. It's much more Burgundian. Um, and then seeing the fruit come in and understanding from a fruit quality perspective that some of the vintage conditions on the fruit, whether you're seeing a little bit of powdery mildew or a little bit of botrytis, and how these were coming into the cellar, and they weren't being sorted out necessarily,
Mm-hmm.
unless they were
Mm-hmm.
like really disgusting, but they were. It made me realize that a lot of the regional wine styles that we're trying to understand by what's in the glass from
Mm-hmm.
a MW or master sommelier perspective, actually comes from the vintage conditions and how that plays out in with the grape variety and in the wine itself. And it sort of gave me one of my first epiphanies into the making of wine, in that in the new world, or Australia, in the world where the winemaking universities are very technical and very protective, um, it's kind of at a loss for character, and so because we're so precious about farming to perfection and having perfect clusters,
Mm-hmm.
perfectly ripe clusters of grapes with no rot, no nothing on them. It made me realize that a lot of the character in wine and in specific regions, really is because of the weather climate in that region, and just the natural farming that occurs, and they haven't been, this is a business that's reliant on the grapes that they've farmed that year, and sometimes you
Mm-hmm.
do have
Mm-hmm.
faults coming through in those fruit parcels, but how do you work with them? And it really was such an honest reflection of the vintage and the place, and it really made me realize that we over I don't know, we homogenize a lot of our grape varieties in the New World by not allowing, the true expression of them in that vintage. So that
Yeah.
was sort of a pivotal moment for me, and it sort of also made me want to explore more regions and where I could see this elsewhere. And so, from Austria, I went to Germany, and it was 2013. So it was the vintage in Germany where we had this crazy, crazy humid, warm, like thunderstorms in October, and it was just a breeding ground for botrytis and other things in the fruit, and seeing how it was handled and understanding, like, oh, this is why there's so much sulfur in these wines, or this is why they have to
Mm-hmm.
pick so early some years, or this is where this marmalade character is coming from. And and then, yeah, looking at producers like Keller, and how they came out with GMAX, that really rich botrytis, you know style wine, but in a drier style. And yeah, just you don't get to experience wines or understand wine, I think, truly understand wine and why a wine is until you sort of live and breathe and be in that place. And that was really sort of just what fueled me. And I think doing those harvests allowed me to connect the dots between farming, winemaking, and what's actually being represented in the glass, which is really what the MW qualification is about. Is, we want you to talk about what's in the glass in front of you and how it got there and what are the considerations for winemaking, vintage, quality, all of those things. And I don't think I would have, I don't think I would have gotten there that quickly if I hadn't taken the time, uprooted my life, and just like committed to being a nomad for a few years and roaming vineyards around the world. But it really got me hooked on winemaking and also just on the cultural terroir of a place,
Yeah.
And that's what I think I'm attracted to in the Willamette Valley is, as much as anything else, is that cultural terroir of this place. And the people have so much to do with that.
Oh, I absolutely love that. And, I genuinely, I find that insight, I find it really inspiring for me. And, some of the things that I talk about are making a connection between the place where the wine is made and where it's consumed. And I'll be honest, I at times I'm quite shocked by some of the comments that I hear people at tastings make with the wine in their glass and sniffing and tasting it right in front of the winemaker. I'll be honest, I just find a lot of them just really unempathetic and just downright rude in some cases. That just not really getting what you've just said there. It's like, okay, fine, we are we're here representing, say it's Austria or say it's Germany, and we go in with a preconception, but in the nicest way, shit happens. It's like you get what the year gives you. That is the risk that those winemakers have taken on, so naturally, there will be, I think, a point well made. Either variation, but then also potentially intervention. If you need to actually get a wine out there, and I think again this sort of reductionist conversation of, was this got sulfur in it, or was this organic, or just literally picking on one feature among the the cornucopia of challenges and adaptations and just stresses really that I guess every crazy winemaker has to sign up for, really, because that comes with the territory.
I think that's really interesting, that insight that you just gave, and it makes me think that this is maybe some of the problem that we're having in the wine industry now, is that I think the bullshit of the wine industry and what a lot of people have presented as what wine is just so far removed from the real realities of the people here doing the work and in the field. And I understand, we want to, sit out and look over the beautiful vines with a cheese board and a nice glass of wine, and but there's that showing that is just so false, like a lot of the time, yes, we do get to enjoy that, but that's not all of it, and I think that maybe this is where some of the disconnect and bringing a younger generation and a generation that wants to have more transparency and more honesty in what they're doing. I think the traditional wine marketing that you sort of see around the place, I mean, you look at a lot of wine marketing and you think, gosh, that could be Tuscany, that could be Napa, that could be Tasmania. There's not a lot tearing it apart from each other. And that kind of the very traditional, just rolling out that 4 square cookie cutter image of people enjoying wine in a sun-soaked vineyard, and it's just not very real, to a lot of people, and it's certainly not real to the product, I
Yeah.
think, and really the origins of the product even.
It's so true, and again, you're speaking my language here, Bree, because I actually I feel as though wine is just missing a trick in a lot of cases. I think there are some notable exceptions. But I just think, look, if we just look around, and it's maybe something that people have heard me talk about before, but I don't see the whole sort of farmers market movement and wanting to connect with where our food is coming from and having a conversation with the person that made our food. I see it in London. I'm sure we see it where you are in Australia, and all around the world. It's like find the farmers market, and you'll kind of find the truth, and it's almost like, yeah, the wine has got that. I think it seems to be ahead of the game in that. In terms of, I know there are artisanal versions of all the other products, but something like beer, it's like it's maybe the way it's made. It's maybe slightly, there's less risk, let's say, in terms of the product and it all sort of coming together. And I just think, yeah, if we actually as a wine industry, if we actually again communicated honestly. Right the way through the chain, and the people that they were buying the wine actually had a closer connection with all of the things that you've just spoken about there in terms of that variation and the risk and all of that. I can't help but imagine that we'd see more people saying, wow, like wine, this is an amazing thing. Actually, this is not just a commodity. This is not just something we pick up, stick in the basket with the other commoditized things in the supermarket. It's like this is this should be a more artisan thing, or this is something that actually it's kind of got soul, if you like. In the same way that we may be looking to farmers markets to find that soul and connection. It's like wine can do that as well, and I think it does it really well.
Yeah, and I think, I agree. And I think, that I don't think many people take the time to consider how wine gets into the bottle, and I think part of some of that traditional marketing has sort of taken us away from that and away from thinking that this is a truly farmed product, and it's reliant on people being in the vineyard to tend the vines, to be there, every other day, to be in there monitoring, checking when you need to spray, opening up the canopy when you need to, and raising wires, and that it's a real, it's a very high touch product, and I think we've kind of taken, by not being honest about it or by not talking about it that way, we haven't maybe been, I don't know, as effective as we could be about this is a farmed product, and we, unlike beer that can be made every other month, we only get this one shot a year at making a beautiful product, and more and more we're seeing challenges every single year with the erratic nature of the climate and how it's changing. I mean, I never thought that we'd have an actual season called wildfire season, it's an additional season now, is wildfire season. And it's just, it's heartbreaking, and it creates a lot of, I think, stress and PTSD and challenges for, a new challenge for people that are already, in a challenging industry and reliant on what the climate and Mother Nature gives us. We're farming, and I think sometimes wine has been taken so far away from that farmed product that it's been a bit of a disservice to wine itself, and we kind of need to readdress that, I think.
Yeah, totally. And I think in kind of in transition, I definitely feel as though it's almost like an underdog story as well. It's again, I don't think people really understand the risks and the the sort of the ways that the kind of list of ways that a harvest can be ruined. So I just think we're and again most winemakers that they seem to wear those risks and wear those challenges lightly. So again, I find so many of the winemakers, the most engaging, the most, humorous, and just good people. And I just think, the more of those sorts of messages we can sort of get out there, the better. But kind of in transition, really, and really kind of moving the story along. And I know that I want to balance this out, and I know that there are you have many other interests and kind of passions. And I'd like to ask a question really of you, Bree. Really a big question. Kind of what do you see really as the most compelling business case for greater diversity and equity in the wine industry? And kind of in parallel with that, where do you kind of think we are on that journey?
I think we need more diversification, and I think from a regional resilience and an industry resilience, we need to move away from a reliance on I think varietal labeling. We need to not be so obsessed with this variety in this place, and that's changing swiftly, whether it's because of the climate, whether it's because of community economics and logistics. I think we just need to be a lot more open-minded and flexible in our approach to how the tradition has been, the traditional regions have been developed. I think it is happening. I think it's starting to happen. We're seeing it here in the Willamette Valley, more grape varieties being planted.
Mm-hmm.
But, we really need to be looking towards varieties that are either, more drought tolerant or, are ripening outside of wildfire season.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not only, the Willamette Valley and Oregon, this is happening everywhere in Napa and Washington, in Spain and Portugal. We need to be more flexible in the styles of wine that we can make as well, because there are going to be some years where we can't make, a red wine from this grape variety because of the climatic challenges that we've been given. And also, regions that are very reliant on labor. You can't send vineyard stewards out into the field in the worst air quality on the world, at the time, just to harvest grapes, So
Mm-hmm.
I think
Mm-hmm.
that we need to, just be a lot more flexible and a lot more creative in how we're approaching what wine is in this day and age. And I think also that comes down to distributors and importers, and it also comes down to sommeliers and the wine buyers being able to communicate these concepts with consumers. It's a big wine world out there, and so there's a lot of competition. But we, at the heart of it, we need to be coming back to what's protecting people, what's protecting the environment, and what's protecting people, and what's protecting the livelihoods, in this industry, because it's not just the people who own the wine brands or own the vineyards who are at stake here, where we will lose vineyard stewards, vineyard workers, if we don't learn how to be more adaptive in our approaches to making wine and to presenting wine, and really, just to the success of being able to change a style on a whim, and being able to effectively communicate why that needed to be done, and have the public understand, that there is more than just a single winemaker relying on this product to be sold off the shelf. There's communities at stake here.
Yeah, and I can only imagine that's actually in somewhere like the Willamette Valley. I can imagine that's a real challenge, no? Because again, you mentioned the sideways effect, and I think most people that like wine and know a bit about wine, and they if they know they make wine in Oregon, they're going to know it's Pinot Noir, and so actually, I can again, probably paraphrasing or putting words in your mouth, or the words of the mouth of people around you. I can imagine that's not always a popular message to get out there, because again, it's like saying, okay, we've had this, really, I think incredible success, and we're making amazing wine. Again, I haven't really mentioned about the wines I had. They were as incredible as the people. They were just absolutely stunning. Again, predominantly Pinot Noir, Chardonnay. Of course, then you go to Briandet and you get a Tannat, and there was all sorts of different sources as well, so different styles of Pinot Noir. But I can imagine actually maybe deep down in the industry, kind of that message of we should be diversifying for all of those good reasons. I can imagine that maybe viscerally there's maybe a bit of a reaction to that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot been put in Pinot Noir here, a lot of money, obviously, but also just a lot of emotional,
Yeah.
investment, and educating the US market about Pinot Noir. You can imagine these guys back in the 70s and 80s when Pinot Noir wasn't really a thing, going out into the market and really having to invest in telling that story and educating the market. And I do think there is a bit of a generational hurdle to get over. And, being sensitive to the fact that there's a lot of investment in this grape variety here, and rightly so. It makes extremely high quality wines in this place, and the people that work on these wines, they hold themselves to very high standards. And so, as a wine region, it's very difficult to find, a really poorly, executed wine here. However, I do think that there are increasingly, we're being shown and we're seeing that, Pinot Noir is better on some sites or some hillsides than on others. And, the Willamette Valley itself is a 3.5 million acre AVA, and there's a lot of different valleys and aspects of slope and elevation that, can be better suited to other grape varieties. And so I think we're starting to see that, and for instance, something like Cabernet Franc, that, is a complete opposite to Pinot Noir in terms of its cluster morphology, and, Pinot Noir being very tight clustered, thin skinned, very delicate and sensitive and prone to rot and things like that, and early ripening. And then Cabernet Franc, on the other hand, being very small berried, but loose clustered, thick skinned, and later budding and later ripening, we just need to be hedging our bets a little bit more, so that, in the years where we get maybe a spring frost and it wipes out some of the Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, that we have something else to go into, whether that's Sauvignon Blanc or Chenin Blanc or Cabernet Franc, or all of the above. We just need to have that little bit more diversity for the resilience of our industry. And also it creates more excitement, I'm a Pinot Noir nerd as well. Obviously, that's what brought me here, is cool climate Pinot Noir, and I love it. And I love, exploring Burgundy as well, but I can't afford that anymore, And so, Oregon is the next best place to being able to explore site-specific Pinot Noirs from a cool climate, So that is very important story still here. But, there is so much potential for this valley. That was the one thing that really struck me when I worked at Bethel Heights that first harvest was, I got to spend the summer in the Willamette Valley, and waiting for the fruit to ripen. I was able to taste with a lot of producers, and really, sit and contemplate and philosophize about this beautiful place where I was, that really had just this perfect growing season of, a lot of spring and winter rainfall, and then really no rainfall and not a lot of cloud cover between sort of July to the end of September, and just having this perfect growing season where you weren't so reliant on having to spray every single week, like you have to in Burgundy. And it just made me realize after working in places like Ribera Sacra and the Douro
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
Austria and Georgia that there's so much opportunity in this valley. It's such an ideal growing season and region,
Yeah.
that it's just been underimagined. And I think that was really I think that's just the timing of this place in the American wine story. It came about, when Americans were really just first discovering wine as a table wine beverage. And so it just hadn't really evolved from there yet. But I think it is now because we have so much outside input now coming in. Um, and that's not,
Hmm.
people
Hmm.
like me
Hmm.
who have
Hmm.
worked around the world, who have, broader perspectives and can bring those perspectives in to maybe people who have, are reliant on being here and working their farms and haven't been able to get out and explore the wine world. We now have a ton of Burgundian producers here. We have Italian producers here. So everyone is coming and bringing their little pieces of perspective and
Yeah.
knowledge. And I really think that's how this industry is starting to accelerate and change here, is because of all that outside perspective coming in, and the knowledge sharing, because the nature of this community is about knowledge sharing and collaboration. And so everyone's, open to having that conversation and being a little bit curious. But yeah, there's still that fear that, well, we can't stop talking about Pinot Noir. It is 90% of red plantings in the Willamette Valley. So how much do we want to talk about other things
Yeah.
at the expense of
Yeah.
Pinot Noir, right?
Yeah. And I think again, it's I would bring up that earlier point around talking about your neighbour's wines. I see it in exactly the same way when it comes to grape varieties as well. Again, you're not losing something if somebody is having a Cab Franc or a Mondouse or something quite off the wall. And I mentioned
Yeah.
that because I think when we first spoke back in 2020, which again I will link up the interview below because it's really interesting to me that I'm seeing a lot of the same themes coming up as well. So this is a drum you've been banging for for at least 5 years, let's say. But I think that
Yeah.
really the beauty of having this conversation now is that you've had an opportunity through your brand, limited edition wines, to building on all of what we've been speaking about there around the diversity, around the amazing landscape and amazing people, and the amazing opportunities still, I think, to explore and still express what you've got going on over there. But now we're speaking here in 2024, you're just finishing harvest. You've got your bottles and you've got your brand kind of out there into the world. So yeah, I'd love you to, in a sense, kind of, talk us through what you've got going on at limited edition wines, which, as I know you, I think will be an expression and, a thoughtful representation of really all of what we've been talking about for the last 40 minutes or so.
Limited edition, I started in 2019. That was my first vintage and it started very small. But yeah, the quality of the fruit here, and that's really what I want to be able to showcase, is that the ability to produce high quality fruit and high quality wines here from several different grape varieties is really what I'm trying to, have a platform for with limited edition, and just show the industry that we can have high quality Pinot Noir, cool climate Pinot Noir, and high quality cool climate Chardonnay. And I love making those wines, but we can also have really high quality cool climate Cabernet Franc and Sauvignon Blanc and Chenin Blanc. And that there's an appetite in the market for those wines. And I think that is a testament also to the work that's been done here, over the past 4 decades, of producers committing to only putting premium quality wines
Hmm.
out in the marketplace. And so the Oregon reputation and the Willamette Valley reputation has been built around quality as much as it has been built around Pinot Noir. And I think that's what I'm really trying to showcase, with limited edition, is that, you know, things change, climates change, trends change, and we don't need to be reliant on a single grape variety here. We can have an imagination, and we can reach so many different people and bring more on-ramps to the wine category and to the Willamette Valley through making more wines from different grape varieties and more styles. We're starting to see a lot more sparkling wine here made in the Willamette Valley, which makes sense. Champagne grapes, Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, it makes sense.
Yeah.
But, we're also seeing an appetite for pet nat, and, people making pet nat from Zweigelt and Menthea and, just having fun and making delicious, unpretentious, good, quality farmed product. Wine is a farmed beverage, and we need to be able to have those conversations more. And that's where the diversity conversation comes in. And so, limited edition, we start our harvest in the first week of September with sparkling wines. And, this year I made a field blend sparkling wine from, young vines that were planted in the vineyard, Pinot Meunier, Trousseau, Gamay Noir, and Chardonnay, all planted on this one hillside, all planted at the same time. So young grapes couldn't really give me enough fruit to make an individual wine from each of them. So I have that ability to be creative and say, I'm going to harvest all of this as an estate field blend product and make a field blend expression sparkling wine from all of these grapes. And then, from there, I start moving into my Chardonnay harvest and my Pinot Noir harvest, and making, red wines and traditional Chardonnays from those grape varieties. But then I also get to start working with Trousseau Noir, Gamay Noir, which I think Gamay Noir here is really only just being tapped into now. Doug Tennell was a real pioneer with bringing in high quality clonal selections of Gamay Noir, and just making really engaging, complex Gamay Noir. And now we're seeing, it was the biggest growth in plantings in the Willamette Valley in the last 2 years has been plantings of Gamay Noir. And so we're starting to see an industry latch on to that. But it's also because we can make really structured, high quality Gamay Noir here that's distinctively different to Beaujolais, and have a real quality Willamette Valley conversation about unique Gamay Noir here. And I'm really excited about that and creating a premium product from that. But then I'm also, excited about, I pressed my Mongoose yesterday, and my Grunewald, was brought in, last Wednesday, and that was my last fruit to come in. And, I make about 20 different wines from about 18 different grape varieties, but it's part of that research and development program of seeing what works in which AVA here and really starting to nut that out. And what I've been really encouraged by is the market acceptance of these wines. People in South Carolina and Florida are loving, Menthea Rosé. People are latching on to Chenin Blanc that I make with a little bit of botrytis, because that's what our season gives us at the end of the year. And, they're just captivated by this complexity in this fruit. And I'm really not seeing any objections in the market to, oh, but Willamette Valley only does Pinot Noir, or, we have a lot of Pinot Noir out there. We have a lot of Chardonnay out there. But what the past generations have done is build a reputation around Oregon wine being high quality. And the appetite out in the greater market is that we want to see more Oregon wine. We want to see more Willamette Valley wine at high quality levels. And it doesn't really matter what grape variety that is. And then the new generations that are coming through, COVID has sort of been a reset for our market a little bit, because we lost a lot of people in the wine industry and the hospitality industry during COVID who went to other industries. And now we have a new generation of buyer coming through that isn't, hasn't been hammered into them that the Willamette Valley is Pinot Noir. They're just interested in having great wines, and they're interested in having wines that are made with an integrity of product and an integrity of story. And the questions that I'm being asked now by sommeliers and wine buyers in markets are not, what clone is this? It's, how are the vineyard workers treated? Do they have living wages? Do they have health care? What is the equitable product here? And how much transparency can I see and can I share with my customers for why I have this wine on the list? And I think that's the really important thing going forward for any wine region, is that you need to have products with purpose. We don't need no one needs another wine brand that's just going to be a Foursquare wine that means nothing. You can't be that in this very competitive marketplace anymore. You have to have wines that mean something to people, and you have to be able to stand behind your product and have those conversations and really be trying to do something for good, because that's what the new generation wants. And thank goodness, because I don't know, I mean, start to question humanity sometimes when you see what's going on out there. But, it's really refreshing for me when I travel to all of these markets and being asked these questions about the environment and how sustainable is your product.
Yeah.
And not just sustainability from an environmental perspective, but sustainability from a human perspective and a community perspective.
No, I absolutely love that. And, you're happily answering all of the questions and all of the thoughts that I'm having there, and I would just kind of reflect back. I think my own sort of I like to sort of map things out and imagine how that would look on a graph almost, and I just think that what I think you've done so well there, Bree, is lay out the interplay between diversity and resilience, which I think resilience is so important, and I think when you're again, you're coming from a commercial perspective. You want something resilient, right? You don't want something that's a risky investment. You want your money to be in a safe place. You don't want one storm or one weather event or one type of bug or not being able to find employees and staff on a certain day or a certain weekend. That could, in the, let's call it the traditional model, for the sake of a better word, that can wipe you out. If you're going monoculture, if you're going very, very short picking window, it's not as de-risked as something with the amount of diversity that you're talking about there. So I love that actually it's like lining up all of those things. It makes sense. And as you say, from a kind of a spiritual and a emotional point of view, and I know there's loads of people that will sort of poo-poo that and show me the money, but it totally makes sense on a monetary point of view. And I just think that the kind of the connector between the financials and the diversity, I think it's resilience. It's just you're building something that's just stronger in and of itself.
Yeah, that's the goal. And I think that's also one of the reasons why there's so many women coming out in this industry now as well, because I feel like women kind of ask those questions more and have a little bit more allyship and advocacy. Also, as being sort of marginalized, for most of history, and maybe still so in the US at the moment, especially. But I think that having more women in the industry brings in more of these conversations and more of these thoughts as being actual absolutes and priorities in regions and in brands. And that's something that I'm also, super passionate about, but also am really excited about the Pacific Northwest and, the West Coast of the US in general, is seeing that expansion of women-owned brands and women-owned viticulture companies, and how they're being allies for their workers and for marginalized communities and peoples. And I think it's making it a more interesting and equitable and sustainable wine landscape.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love it. And something that we've been sort of working on behind the scenes, which I'd love to sort of I guess premiere here and be able to announce and to go into a little bit more detail on it. It is really ourselves collaborating, and the way I sort of invite you to kind of talk about that and unpack that really is I think really it's going to get very meta now. Would be just sort of really kind of briefly reflect and discuss I guess my work at interpreting wine, and really again how you have seen and how you feel that work can help you leverage those messages from communities and again from places like Oregon, and I guess how we've sort of bonded really on that that bigger goal of kind of amplifying messages like that, and of course promoting greater diversity and equity in the industry.
Yeah, and I think that really comes back to, I think you coming from an outside industry and bringing a fresh perspective and fresh eyes to a very traditional industry. And I think that what we've seen, especially in the last few years, which is, sort of aligned with, the 5 years that I've known you as well, is this shift in the communication channels, and the rise of podcasts and the rise of Instagram and social media and YouTube and all of these, really more diverse communication channels. And you can look at them and be cynical about them as just being, additional marketing and sales channels. But I think at its core, it's much more important and much bigger than that. And what you're doing is being able to bring the stories and sort of heart and cultural terroir of wine regions to so many people across the world via, an hour-long interview, an hour-long conversation, and very organic conversations, that move beyond just the traditional wine marketing and the traditional talk of tasting notes and clonal selections and soil types. And while those things are all very important and contribute very much to a region's story and a reason for the quality and the why of a grape behind a wine, they're not the whole story. And I think that's what everyone is starting to resonate more with, is that we need deeper connections, and our world during COVID got very isolated. And I think coming out of that, we have so much more at our fingertips. Like, yes, we want to be back in person with everyone, but we are also very much now connected via these podcasts and via these communication and storytelling streams. And I think if you look back at how humans have evolved, we've always, sat around in groups telling stories and philosophizing and, reimagining our places in this earth and in our places in it and our purpose, and I think that what you do is incredibly noble, because you're giving so many people like these opportunities to tell their purpose and to reflect on their stories. And so what I really wanted, you to do, and what we're going to be doing is bringing you in for the Oregon Wine Symposium, to give, just how thoughtful your brand building and how thoughtful the communication strategy and storytelling strategy is that you do with people. And you could take this to any industry, but you've latched onto the wine industry, and and obviously we have similar philosophies about equity and diversity and telling those stories. But I think the way that you approach it, because you don't have those hang-ups of a formal certification or a formal tradition in wine, you're just able to pull out more relevant conversations and more interesting conversations, and also allow producers to find their voices and their true North Star in many ways through some of the questions that you ask. And so I think that's a really important thing for regions and for producers to be able to connect with, and to be able to take that time to reflect on their whys. Why am I here? Why am I doing this? Why am I committed to this? And I think that the process that you use really helps to bring that connection from the producer into what they're doing and communicate it better. And so I'm really excited to have you come to the Oregon Wine Symposium and do these workshops with people. And yeah, hopefully give everyone some more insight about how to tell their story and how to connect with people, and have meaningful conversations, and help us all be more successful in connecting with each other and sharing the beautiful story of wine and our wine regions. And the Pacific Northwest wine region as a whole, it's only 4%, 5% of US production combined. But I feel like through these channels, we can have such a higher impact and a lot more presence and visibility by being able to really effectively communicate. And I think that's especially in this day and age, and especially in the US, communication and how to communicate effectively with each other and have this discourse is more important than ever, And so, yeah, I'm excited to have you out and to get you out into the region again, because even in the 5 years that you haven't been here, the Willamette Valley's changed, Oregon's changed, Washington's changed. And so it's just bringing fresh eyes and fresh stories and connecting with more people. We have a lot of people, a lot of makers and growers in our industry, and being able to tell those stories and connect with those people. There's a lot of stories out there for you to tell.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Share.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bree. Yeah, it's a real honor. It was a real honor to go out there in 2020, and it's really a story I regularly tell. I think that I'm almost still in shock, being given such an amazing opportunity, and really the trust that just sort of says, okay, we're going to rent you a car. You've got 6 nights or 7 nights. We'll set you up with appointments, and I think that the way that I approached that, I was like, okay, can I get another one there? Can I get another one there? And I think even our appointment was sort of squeezed in an hour and a half gap that I had, and I think that really, hopefully, just shows, again, my only visit to the region, but I feel a very deep connection, and really want to support the people there, and just I know that from my perspective, from what I've seen, from what I've tasted. And I've always been following what's going on over there. It's just, you guys I think you're doing a great job. I think you absolutely, anyone that I've met that's been over for Pinot Camp or has, had any kind of connection or association. But, it's like, there's always change coming. As you say, there's always generational change coming. There's always market change coming. So, we, I think and perhaps, you collectively, you also need to keep changing, keep adapting to maintain that quality, which again, I think was a really excellent point you made earlier. It's like, okay, the message has been around quality Pinot Noir, but it can be about quality. I think that's something, again, no one can really doubt. It's like, it's try and find a bad wine in Oregon. I dare you.
It's really true. Yeah.
really, yeah. It ain't gonna happen. But also, just the people, the food, the place, and I'm again, it's going to be another winter energy tapping into, but. I'm not as scared as I was the first time, so I feel like I'm prepared now. So really, been so fascinating talking to you again, Bree, and I've loved being able to weave together, I think, organically, and I believe that the ones that have really engaged with us and our energy and your message, they're of course still listening, and have really engaged thus far. So I'd really ask, as we look to wrapping up, kind of again micro reflection, really, what do you think, and what do you hope really that listeners will kind of take away as perhaps a call to action maybe from our discussion today, maybe in terms of supporting sustainable wines, sustainable wineries, but then also that kind of parallel message really around supporting a more diverse, a more inclusive wine business.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think you've said it. That really, I'd love people to just be a little more open-minded and accepting of change when it comes, and also the power of asking questions can really shift. You can really be an ally for a lot of people by asking questions and then spending your dollars where those deserve to be spent. And so I think just being more curious, trying to really understand where something comes from, and the whys of a region, the whys of why this bottle, why this style, and what does it bring, and what does it bring to the table, and just the beauty of wine as a beverage that really brings people together and can be such a social lubricant, but also a force for good and a force for changing conversations, a force for having conversations around environmental sustainability, around being an ally for people, around diverse communities, around this bottle of wine. It can be such a billboard and such a platform for having really important, honest conversations with people and with your community, and opening the eyes of others as well. And so I think, my ask to everyone would be to be curious, drink different, and just enjoy in moderation, but share, and be really curious and thoughtful about where you're spending your dollars, and thoughtful about what you're imbibing and where it comes from, and really thinking about things like that. It's a very connective product in every way, to the earth, to each other, to our history as humans on this planet. It's a very special beverage, and I think that you can tap into that if the wines are made right, and if you're in that mindset as well.
A huge thanks to today's guest, Bree Stock, Master of Wine. Such a pleasure to have you back on, and amazing to be able to announce my participation in the Oregon Wine Symposium, which takes place in Oregon on the 3rd and 4th of February 2025. You can find details of my session alongside the full program at OregonWineSymposium.com. And don't forget to visit breestockmw.com, the link is below, where you can learn more and find Bree's main social media handles. And why not get in touch with Bree to let her know what you thought of the episode and ask any questions that it raised. Next time on Interpreting Wine's Mosaic of Wine, Series 1, in episode 572, I'll be speaking with Andreas Wickhoff, MW, General Manager for Weingut Brundelmeier. Do subscribe to be alerted when that episode goes live. See you then.